Alright guys, welcome back, and today we're going to dive back into the college football world, and we are going to look at what I think, if you cannot tell by the thumbnail or the title of this video or even the picture on the screen up here. But today we're going to make predictions on where I think college game day is going to be going to week by week. So we're going to go week 1 to week 13. So the first game of, I guess, week 0, we're not counting week 0 because who thinks of week 0 when they think of college game day? But week 1, opening week, 2, rivalry week. I'm not going to do like postseason or anything like that because that's just impossible to predict. But at least we have, we know we have confirmed games going on from week 1 to week 13, and that's what we're gonna go. And let's just get into it, because I know these first couple of weeks we're just gonna go right by because it's already been announced. Week 1, week 2, and basically week 3. No, it's not officially been announced, but I believe like Pat McAfee have said on his show that we're basically ready to be in. This is ready to be announced, and it's going to be week 1 is going to be LSU and Clemson. Clemson going to Death Valley this time, and this has been a online, especially with their fan bases, this has been an online debate for years and years and years now. Who has the real Death Valley? And of course, last season Clemson coming in was one of the favorites to win the national championship, and they did not. They did anything but, and they just. I can't think of another word besides like just disappointed, bitterly disappointed. And if you would have asked me, let's go back 1 year to the day, who would be your national championship teams that would be your prediction for the national championship? I would tell you Clemson would be one, and maybe Penn State would be the other one. Ohio State, Penn State, Georgia. I don't think Indiana. I don't think anyone really predicted Indiana. I don't really think most people predicted Miami to get there as well, but they did. But I thought for sure that maybe Clemson and Penn State, depending on the draw, were kind of heading down this collision course, and they were, just for a random bowl game that nobody else watched besides their fan bases, and I honestly doubt that the majority of their fan bases watched that game because it was such a bitterly disappointed year for both of those teams. Of course, James Franklin is now at Virginia Tech. Clemson, Dabo is probably on the hot seat right now. I don't think that they fire him anytime soon. I think that's going to be one of these things where Dabo either resigns or retires, and the board, the administration, whatever you want to call it, the athletic directors, whatever, they basically make him step down at some point. I don't think, maybe it is the end of this year, depending on how bad Clemson's year is. But, I speak for all Ohio State fans. We don't like Dabo. We never really have, especially after 2020, where he ranked us like 11, and then we went in and destroyed them and set them back, a couple of years. And ever since then, Clemson has been trying to get back to the playoff. They, of course, did in the first 12-team playoff, where they ended up losing to Texas in the first round. And, that's going to be something that everyone's going to be looking at, because if Clemson can get back to what old Clemson was, because, of course, this picture over here is from the 2020 national championship game between LSU and Clemson. Clemson, of course, ended up losing this game to Joe Burrow and the LSU Tigers, which would be their only national championship of, I guess you could say the modern era, I guess the playoff era, I guess I should say, to kind of be more precise there. But the playoff era, this was LSU's only national championship so far. And, this was a super team that they were going up against. Clemson was not a super team. Clemson was a super team. LSU was a super team. And, the controversy surrounding that Ohio State game from a couple of weeks before this game, of course, where the refs blew a fumble call that was clearly a fumble and a scoop and score for Ohio State. They called it back. Clemson ends up winning the game by 4 points. So right there, that's the swing that Ohio State needed. Didn't happen. It's whatever. And, like I said before, Ohio State comes in the year after, and Clemson had all the confidence in the world, and Ohio State beat the crap out of them for 4 quarters. And ever since then, Clemson has been on a downward trajectory. They, of course, lost this game in 2019, the national championship game above me. So that's one loss. They lost 2 games, one against Notre Dame and Ohio State in 2020. They lost another, I think, 3 games in 2021. And it's just been every year Clemson have lost or the same amount of losses. They've never had an improvement, but they've lost the same amount or worse. They've done worse or the same for every year since 2018. And, you can obviously say, well, they only lost 1 game in 2019 and 2 games in 2020. Okay, cool. Ever since then, Clemson has been fighting to get to bowl games. Sorry. That's just what it is. So, Clemson is trying to get back to what they were. I don't think they do under Dabo Swinney. I think the way that he has handled NIL has been atrocious, to say the least. Of course, it's probably been close to 10 years now at this point, but he, of course, made this statement where if NIL was ever going to be implemented in college football, then he would leave the sport entirely. Well, NIL has been a thing for almost half a decade now, and he's still here. So that's if that's all I gotta say about Dabo. Anyways, this is, of course, going to be Lane Kiffin's first game as the LSU head coach. Of course, him famously leaving Ole Miss before their playoff run last year, and the drama surrounding that, and of course now him taking shots at his old team. This is going to be a test for LSU, and to really see where they rank among the college football playoff contenders, because I personally think that LSU is going to be a college football playoff contender this year, but this is going to be a good stepping stone to see where LSU is at, because if they struggle against a Clemson team that is obviously rebuilding this year, that's a red flag. So this game, I would say LSU. If I had to make a prediction right now, I'd say LSU would be my pick to win this game. Week 2 has also been announced, and it is Ohio State going to Austin to play Texas. Of course, this is going to be the 3rd year in a row that Ohio State and Texas have played. They had the semifinal game in 2024, the game in Columbus last year, and now this game in Austin with this home-and-home scheduled. And, of course, the picture above me here is, of course, from the semifinal game with Jack Sawyer and the scoop and score to basically seal Ohio State's national championship that year. And it was kind of an up and down game where Texas kind of kept Ohio State's offense, which was, rolling, in check. Jeremiah Smith, I think, had 2 catches in this game, and Ohio State's defense had to win the game for them, and they did. And kind of the same little thing here in the last game that Ohio State and Texas played in Columbus. Jeremiah Smith had a couple drop passes, was basically held in check, but also Julian Sand was making his first start ever in an Ohio State uniform. And Texas also had a first year, or I guess it's not a first year, but Arch Manning was making his first start as a number 1 quarterback. Of course, he had a couple of starts as a backup quarterback when Quinn Ewers was out with injury, but this was his first game where he was given full custody, the full keys of the kingdom, basically. And he struggled, to say the least. In his first couple of games, he struggled. He looked a lot better at the end of the year. Same with Julian Sand. Not the last couple of games, but, the mid to, let's say, week 4 to week 13. Julian Sand looked awesome and looked like the Heisman winner, and Arch Manning from week 1 to week 4, maybe 5, looked horrible, and then progressively got better as the weeks went along. And we just got to see what Arch Manning looks like, because this defense, Ohio State's defense, is losing a lot. Texas is not losing as much, I don't believe. They're bringing back a few key pieces on defense. They're bringing, of course, back Arch Manning. They're bringing in Cam Coleman from the transfer portal out of Auburn. They're bringing back basically all of that offensive line that yes, did struggle against that Ohio State defense last year, but that Ohio State defense was a historic defense, and probably the best defense since, I would say, 2019. And as far as Ohio State's is concerned. And maybe the year before that defense with Jack Sawyer and JTT and Cody Simon and all those guys, maybe they have a shot or an argument for that. I would just prefer last year's defense for Ohio State over that year. And I would also prefer 2019's defense over both of those defenses, but that's just a me thing. But as I'm saying, Ohio State losing a lot of key pieces on defense, but they're bringing back a lot of key pieces on offense. That majority of that offensive line, Jeremiah Smith, Brandon Innes, Julian Sayin, they are losing their offensive coordinator, Brian Hartline, offensive coordinator. I don't think he really was much of a play caller. I think he was more of that COO or CEO type of coach, basically. Probably the best position coaches in college football history, I would say, as a wide receiver coach. I don't think he worked out well as an offensive coordinator, but I think being a head coach, he would go a lot better at. He's, of course, in South Florida, I think it is, and we'll see what he does. All of Ohio State fans wish him the best of luck down there. But they're, of course, losing him. They're bringing back defensive coordinator Matt Patricia. They're bringing in a new offensive coordinator, and I am blanking on his name now. This is really upsetting for me because I really should know this, and I'm just blanking on his name right now. Arthur Smith. I don't know why that took me so long to get down. Arthur Smith is coming in, a very scrutinized coordinator out of the NFL. He's now coming down to the college level, and we'll see how he works out. Of course, maybe his specialty is more tight ends in the running game, and we'll see what happens with his style and Ryan Day's style and what he wants to do offensively. And yeah, this is just a big wait and see game. Ohio State, this is going to be their first test. Of course, this is going to be Texas's first test. This is going to be in Austin, so we'll see. Ohio State has had Texas's number over these past couple of years, but it's a whole nother ball game when you're at home, and Ohio State knows that because they just played in Columbus last year. So I'm not ready to give you a prediction on that. I will have a full record game-by-game prediction for Ohio State later in the offseason, probably closer to week 1 for Ohio State. But right now I'm just not ready to give you a prediction on that. So we're moving on to week 3, also LSU and Ole Miss. This is going to be at Ole Miss. And do you guys remember the Tennessee game with Ole Miss? This was the game where there was a controversial call at the end of the game, and Tennessee fans decided to throw really whatever they could find onto the field. And, the cheerleaders had to evacuate, the band had to evacuate, the football players had to come off of the sidelines and onto the middle of the field. And it was an embarrassing look for college football, an embarrassing look for Tennessee. I believe like a golf ball was thrown at Lane Kiffin, a mustard bottle was thrown on the field. Just a bad look for Tennessee. I think this environment is going to surpass that environment in terms of hostility, toxicity, all of that stuff, because of the way Lane Kiffin left Ole Miss and the shots that he's been throwing at Ole Miss across the offseason. I'm not very high on Ole Miss this year. They kept a head coach there, which was their defensive coordinator. What was their problem on this team was defense. So they're keeping a coordinator that struggled in his specialty. That was a struggle for Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin, the master, of course, he's going to know the majority of this Ole Miss roster and what the coaching staff likes to do, and he's going to be familiar with Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is going to be familiar with Lane Kiffin. And of course, Lane Kiffin did bring a couple of guys from Ole Miss to LSU. I just think there's more of a talent gap there. Trinidad Chambliss is back for Ole Miss. I think that's their only bright spot. I'm not very high on Ole Miss at all this year. So, yes, it is in Ole Miss, and this would be a storybook thing for Ole Miss to not only make the run that they did in the college football playoff, but also beat Lane Kiffin in Lane Kiffin's first test in the SEC as the LSU head coach. But I just can't do it. I think LSU goes in and gets a win over Lane Kiffin's former team in week 3. Week 4, we're going to move on. Week 4, we are going to go with Oregon at USC in the Coliseum. And I chose this game because Oregon is going to be, at least my pick, if you made me pick a national champion right now, I'd say the Oregon Ducks. I think it's their time. They're kind of following the prompt that Michigan did, that Ohio State did, that Clemson and Penn State did last year, but that didn't work out as well as Oregon, or not Oregon, but Ohio State and Michigan from a couple years ago. They're bringing back Dante Moore, which he probably was pick 2 in the NFL draft last year. If he would have declared, he would have gone number 2 to the Jets. But he didn't. He's coming back. They're bringing in Dylan Raiola. You bringing back a lot of key pieces on that defense. Their wide receivers are always really talented. Their trenches are always really talented. So it's a matter of, can they get over that hill? Because Oregon can win the regular season. We've seen that. They beat Ohio State. They did lose to Indiana in the regular season, but that was their only loss in the regular season. And it's not like Oregon is just running through cupcake schedules all the time. They're playing teams that are respectable, and they're getting punches. Of course, Iowa took them to the wire last year in Kinnick. So they've been tested in the regular season, and they've come out better because of that. Now it's just a matter of, can they get over that hump in the college football playoff? They've gotten their doors blown off of them by Ohio State, Indiana. You want to know what those two teams have in common? They were the eventual national champions. So if Oregon can just get to their line and surpass that with their roster that they've gotten and the coaching staff that they have, Oregon has a really, really good shot of winning the national championship this year. And I would say that they're probably my pick to do it if I had to have one right now. Now, granted, if you would have asked me last year, like I said, I would have had Clemson or Penn State as my national championship pick. Maybe I'm just a jinx. We'll see. So that's my thing for Oregon. And for USC, this is going to be a big test for them because USC is always going to have a great offense. They're returning their quarterback. Their wide receivers are always talented. They're going to have a great offense. It's a matter of, can they stop anything on defense? Because if they can, watch out for USC, and they could make some noise. If it's the same old USC defense, Oregon's going to roll over USC with no problem. And most of the teams that USC is playing with a heartbeat is going to roll over USC no problem. But if USC can hold and have at least a respectable defense, watch out, because Lincoln Riley's problem has been defense ever since his Oklahoma days. And if he's figured that out, USC is going to be a problem for years and years to come as long as Lincoln Riley is there. And this is going to be his first kind of benchmark to see where that defense is at. That offense is going to score points against Oregon, but it's just a matter of, can USC's defense stop Oregon's offense? I will say, if I had to pick somebody, I would go Oregon. I think that they have the best roster in college football. I think they have a top 4 head coach. They have probably a top 5, top 10 staff in college football. I just think it's a matter of, can they get over that last hump? And USC is just not that, at least right now. So I would go, if I had to pick for prediction of this game, I would go Oregon. Week 5, maybe this is a bit of a surprise for week 5, but I am going to go with Texas Tech at Colorado. And the reason I'm going to go with that is because of, it's basically because Colorado is probably, it's on its last leg with Deion Sanders. I don't see Deion Sanders coaching past this year. I don't think he gets fired because I don't think Colorado has the guts, honestly, to fire him. I think it's going to be a kind of a resign thing or step down thing. And it's going to be Deion Sanders' kind of last hurrah in at least Power 4 college football for now. We'll see what happens with other teams. But for now, I think this is going to be Deion Sanders' last year coaching Power 4 college football. And, it's early in the season. It's still, I guess it is earlier in the season. Maybe Colorado has had a couple losses, and maybe this game isn't worth a college game day appearance. But if Colorado can kind of get past with maybe 1 loss, 2 at the very worst, I think this game could be a college game day appearance. Texas Tech is, of course, is the favorite to win the Big 12 this year. They're a college football playoff contender. They did lose Brendan Sorsby to that scandal, and good. Honestly, if you're betting on your own team, you should not be rewarded with playing a season. That's just what it is. I'm sorry, but it just what it is what it is. So, Texas Tech, I think if they figured out that quarterback issue, they'll be a college football playoff contender. And even if they don't, they still have a shot to win the Big 12. And with that, win the college, or not win the college football playoff, but make the college football playoff. And, Texas Tech is probably going to beat Colorado in this game, and I don't expect it to be very close. But Colorado still has Deion Sanders, and that brings a lot of media attention. So this could be Colorado's last dance with the national media, I guess you could say. But if you wanted me to give you a winner for this game in my prediction, Texas Tech by a couple of scores. Week 6. Actually, wait. Before I do that, I actually do have games that I wanted to say for, other games that we could pick. So let's actually go back to week 4 here with Oregon and USC. Sorry, real quick. So with week 4, I have here A&M and LSU. I don't think that this is a game. This is obviously a quality game here, but LSU is coming off of now 2 college football, or I don't know why I'm saying college football, college game day appearances already in week 1 and week 3. I don't think that they want to do week 4 again, so I'm going to pass on A&M and LSU. Ole Miss and Florida. If Ole Miss can win against LSU, I guess, and remain undefeated, and Florida is undefeated at this point in the year, maybe you go back, but I don't see Ole Miss kind of getting double dipped here on college game day, so I'm going to pass on them again. Oklahoma and Georgia. This all depends on if Oklahoma is undefeated, because I have it's almost certain that Georgia will be undefeated at this point in the year. It's a matter of, is Oklahoma going to be? Are they going to lose that game to Michigan? And if they do, I don't see this as a college game day appearance. But if they win, especially on the road in Ann Arbor, that could be a game where both of these teams are going to be in the top 10, maybe even top 5. And it's going to be at UGA. That's a very, very raucous and very intimidating environment. And it's an SEC game. If that game is a battle of undefeateds, it's going to be their night game. So I do see college game day going there. That would probably be my second best option. And honestly, if USC is not very good, then I would honestly lean more towards Oklahoma and UGA than Oregon and USC. And then my last one that I have down here is Iowa at Michigan. Kind of the same thing here. I do think that Oregon and USC have a little bit more of a benefit than Iowa at Michigan. But if Michigan beats Oklahoma and is undefeated, I think Iowa is going to get past Iowa State in the beginning of the year, because Iowa State has just been completely depleted by Penn State and Matt Campbell going to Penn State. But if Michigan can go and beat Oklahoma on the road and be undefeated, Michigan's going to be a top 5, top 10 team. Iowa's probably going to be a top 15 team. Why not? Why not put college game day at Michigan? And, I don't think if those, I think what they play in week 3, week 2, week 3, Oklahoma and Michigan, and if that LSU and Ole Miss game isn't there, then college game day would be going to Ann Arbor. So maybe this is a makeup kind of thing and put them at their first conference game versus Iowa. So those are my 2 games there, or 3 games, I guess. No, 1, 2, 3, 4 games. Sorry, 4 games that I could pick as other options for college game day. Week 5, we'll just go over that as well since I'm already here. Week 5, instead of Texas Tech and Colorado, I have Miami at Clemson. If Clemson can get by LSU and remain and be undefeated, A&M, I'm not very high in A&M, but early in the season, if A&M is undefeated at this point, or no, I'm sorry, Miami. I don't know why I said A&M. Miami at Clemson. Jeez. If Miami is going to be undefeated, most likely by this point in the year, Clemson, if they can get past LSU, they might be undefeated. I haven't looked at their schedule. but that will be a game that a lot of people are going to look at. Clemson is a very intimidating environment when it's, on. I think there was like a streak of like 4 years, 5 years where Clemson did not lose a single home game at one point when Dabo was like at its peak at Clemson. So it's a very intimidating environment. Miami, of course, probably the favorite in the ACC, and they still have not won an ACC championship game, or not even made an appearance at the ACC championship since they've joined the ACC. And this is kind of being like an old guard, new guard situation. So maybe that's a game that College Game Day has an interest in. Ohio State at Iowa. I don't see this game being College Game Day, but maybe if Ohio State beats Texas, Iowa beats Michigan, and maybe, I guess you could say, I don't think it's very likely. I think this is definitely a game that they kind of talk about maybe during College Game Day. I don't think this is a game that College Game Day goes and has it on location. But an option. BYU at TCU. BYU, of course, is going to be a favorite to win the Big 12. TCU is still trying to rebuild, but maybe they could come back and surprise a couple people in that Big 12. But they're still trying to get back to that 2022 year where they made the college football playoff and made the national championship before getting destroyed by Georgia in that game. But ever since then, they've been trying to get back to that. And maybe they do this year, and maybe TCU, as a respectable, maybe they get ranked. BYU is, of course, going to be ranked by this point, and they still are ranked, but they will probably be ranked by this point. If TCU can get ranked, maybe that's an option to showcase some of the Big 12 teams. Washington at USC is my last one here. And if USC can, let's say USC beats Oregon, and Washington, which I think a lot of people are underrating, if Washington is undefeated, it's an old Pac-12 game, kind of the same thing with Oregon and USC. Why not? Why not go back to the Coliseum? Maybe they don't go to Oregon and USC. Why not go to the Coliseum and go and cover a old Pac-12 game? So that's just my little thing for the games in Week 5 that you could see instead of Texas Tech or in Colorado. Moving on to Week 6, I'm going to have Alabama and Georgia. And this game is going to be played in Tuscaloosa this coming year. And this game was just played in Athens last year and Tuscaloosa again 2 years ago. These two teams have been in a very, very competitive rivalry. And I shouldn't even say rivalry. It's more of a competition, a competitive. It's a competitive game. This was. I don't see them like. It's nothing like Alabama Auburn or Georgia Tech or Georgia Auburn. It's nothing like that. But it's a competitive game. Both teams don't like each other, but it's just not a rivalry game. So, but this is a game that every college football fan looks forward to because of these are two top programs in a top 2 conference. They're not the best conference anymore. Sorry, and any SEC fans watching this. They're just not the best conference anymore. But these are the two best teams or best programs in the conference at this moment. Georgia, the best. Texas has probably got something to say about that, especially with Alabama kind of falling off the way that they have in the past couple years. But Georgia is clearly number 1 in the modern NIL era. Alabama, I would probably put 2 as of right now. Texas at a close 3. If Texas makes a leap in the college, makes a run in the college football playoff, I'd be ready to rank Texas over Alabama in terms of modern era college football, NIL era, I guess I should say, college football, where Kalen DeBoer has come into Alabama and I don't want to say disappointed because they've made playoff games, they've made SEC championships, they've beaten Georgia on multiple occasions, but it's just at the same time where like you're Alabama and it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel the same as a Nick Saban team. And that's because Nick Saban is the greatest college football coach of all time. but it just feels like Alabama has kind of lost that oomph to them. So this is a game where maybe Georgia can get over these regular season, bumps that they keep getting against Alabama, no matter what year, no matter what team, no matter what location. Alabama's beaten them in Athens. They've beaten them in Atlanta in the SEC championship game. They've beaten them in the playoff. They've beaten them in Tuscaloosa. And of course, the last time these two teams played, Alabama jumped out to a huge lead, and then Georgia brought it back, took the lead, and that lasted about 15, 20 seconds before Ryan Williams took one to the house, and Alabama survived. And, that was a game that Georgia had no business losing, and they did. And if Alabama didn't play cover 4 and prevent defense for the entire second half, Georgia doesn't get that comeback, and Alabama has a notch on their resume that year, and the game looks a lot worse than it ended up being. But yet again, like I said, Georgia did beat Alabama in the SEC championship last year pretty convincingly, and Alabama did actually win one of their playoff games. Georgia has not won a playoff game since 2022, which is crazy to think about. Since that 2022 national championship against TCU, Georgia has yet to win another single playoff game. 2023, they did not make it. 2024, they lost to Notre Dame. 2025, they lost to Ole Miss. That's crazy to think about. So let's see what happens with Kirby Smart. But I think this game, if you made me pick, I would say Georgia. This would be a game where Kirby Smart kind of gets over that Alabama curse that he has had for what seems like the past decade, and really kind of cements Alabama back into that top mid-level Oklahoma kind of range in the SEC. But Georgia, I think, goes into Tuscaloosa and beats Alabama in this game. And also, before I move on, I only have one game actually down here for week 6, and it's Texas at Oklahoma in Red River. I don't think I really need to explain myself for that, but if there was another game that College Game Day was going to, I'd say Texas and OU, because this game is one of the best rivalry games in all of college football. The neutral field, the festival that goes on before the game, all of that stuff. I just think that Alabama and Georgia just have more pull, especially with most likely these teams going to be undefeated coming into this game. You really can't say that about Texas and OU. They play Ohio State. Texas plays Ohio State. OU plays Michigan. So you really can't say that right now. And that's just something that we got to look at, because, of course, you can say, why wouldn't Texas and Oklahoma be a better game? It's not about that. It's about what's going to get the better views. And week by week basis, maybe, if you look at the season overall, maybe Texas and Oklahoma is the better game. But on a week by week basis, you got to look at the records. You got to look at the rankings. And, of course, we have not gotten there yet. This is just predictions. I'm just saying, if we're going to go week by week and what I think is going to happen in the season, I just think the better overall market value for College Game Day is going to be this game with Alabama and Georgia. So let's move on to week 7, and I don't think anybody has a surprise about this. This is probably going to be one of the biggest games in the Big Ten. It's going to be Ohio State and Indiana. And this game, of course, is going to be the third edition of this game with Curt Cignetti versus Ryan Day. Ohio State got the better of Indiana 2 years ago, and of course that's where I chose this picture. Fun fact, I was actually at this game. I was in the student section, so if you can see the picture up here, I was on, from where the angle of the picture was taken, I was, back behind the photographer. So you can't see the section, but it was really, really cool. That was my first ever Ohio State game. And, the friends that I did go with, they were telling me after that was the loudest that they ever heard Ohio Stadium. And they've been to multiple games before that. And they said that was the loudest that they ever heard Ohio Stadium get. And, this game was big noon kickoff. College Game Day was there. It was a little bit of a rainy day, but it was a noon kickoff, and Indiana was, of course, undefeated at the time. Ohio State had the one loss to Oregon, and, Indiana was coming into Columbus with all the confidence in the world, maybe a little bit more cockiness than they should have, but Ohio State kind of, I don't want to say steamrolled, because Indiana held a lot of, they held their water at a point of attack, especially in that first half. Ohio State just kind of pulled away in the second half and won the game. Last year, of course, we all know, undefeated versus undefeated in the Big Ten Championship, 1 versus 2. Ohio State loses basically because of a kicker, and Indiana wins and gets the number 1 seed, goes undefeated for the rest of the way, and wins the national championship. And Ohio State loses in their first game of the playoff against Miami, eventual national champion runner-up Miami Hurricanes. And you just kind of wonder, like, what if Ohio State would have won that game in Indianapolis, and Indiana plays Miami in the second round instead of Alabama in the second round of what they ended up playing. And Ohio State goes to the Rose Bowl and plays Indiana and plays Ole Miss. Or no. They played Oregon. So you got to wonder what that happens. Indiana plays, Miami, and they play Ole Miss. I feel like that's a little bit more tougher of a path. You can make the argument whether Oregon or Miami is a tougher test, but overall, I think Indiana had the easier path, considering they dominated an Alabama team that had no business being on the same field as them. So that's my thing here. This is going to be the biggest home game, I should say, in Indiana football history against Ohio State. I don't see any other game here that can compete, especially if Ohio State maybe has 1 loss and Indiana is undefeated. I don't see a world where College Game Day comes to any other game besides the game in Bloomington. I do have other games here written down for Week 7. Alabama at Tennessee. This game is always one of the top SEC games of the year, and it's a rivalry game. Tennessee, of course, lost to Alabama last year. 2 years ago, Tennessee ended up beating Alabama on their way to a college football playoff appearance. And this is a game that Alabama has dominated, especially in the modern era of college football. Tennessee's kind of clawed their way back ever since beating Alabama in 2022, that year in Knoxville with the game-winning field goal. Ever since then, this rivalry has been very competitive, very back and forth, and maybe they go there. I doubt it, though. Notre Dame at BYU. This is going to be Notre Dame's first game that's actually worth watching. It's ridiculous that Notre Dame has to they just have the schedule that they do. It's ridiculous. And the fact that college football and the college football world allows Notre Dame to continue to have weak, soft cupcake schedules year in and year out, and now they have basically guaranteed that if Notre Dame is in the top 12, that they're guaranteed a playoff spot, is ridiculous. And something needs to happen with that. Anyways, that's another game. Notre Dame at BYU. That would be an interesting game. Florida State at Miami. Florida State I'm not very high on. Miami, of course, is my favorite to win the ACC. So it's a matter of where is Florida State at that point. Penn State at Michigan. That could be an interesting game. If Michigan is undefeated at this point, Penn State avoids, I think, all of they avoid Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana this year. So Penn State could very well be undefeated at that point. And it's a matter of what does Ohio State look like, because I think Indiana is going to be undefeated by the time they get here. But it's a matter of what does Ohio State look like. Do they have the loss at Texas? Do they have the loss at Iowa? And even if they do, I still see College Game Day coming to Bloomington. So that's my couple of games. Maybe you go there instead. I highly doubt it, though. Week 7, we're going to go, and this was this is probably going to be the hottest take out of all of them. But there's not a lot of options here in Week 8, unfortunately. And I'm going to go with Princeton at Harvard. And a couple of reasons why. College Game Day always has a couple of weeks, maybe two, maybe even just the 1 week where they go to a lower classification school and they just kind of have fun. Maybe it's the Jackson State like they did a couple years ago, or, a group of 5 team that maybe is looking for a playoff contention. But there's just not a lot of games here in Week 8 that I really like. It really spoke. Week 8, a couple of these games that I'm going to name out here, A&M and Bama. Bama we'll see what happens with that Georgia game. A&M, I'm not high on them at all. Really, I think that they are one of these teams that are being ranked in the top 10 and could fall out of the top 25 by week 6. It looks like they're just a glass cannon waiting for a pebble to come to get thrown at them and just shatter. They have their quarterback back, but what else do they really bring back besides like their head coach and their quarterback? I just don't see it. So, not a great game for me. Ole Miss and Texas. Texas, yes, they could be a top 2 team, top 3 team at this point. But what does Ole Miss look like, especially with, the game with LSU and that emotional come down? I guess it's been a few weeks at this point since that game, but what does Ole Miss look like record-wise and ranking-wise? And it's at Austin, so maybe you don't go back to Austin at this point. So that's maybe another one that you scratch off. Texas Tech at Cincinnati, that could be a game that you go to because of the Brendan Sorsby thing. I know technically Brendan Sorsby, and I think honestly, if Brendan Sorsby is playing in this game, they go to this game because of Brendan Sorsby coming from Cincinnati and going to Texas Tech and it being in Cincinnati. And the fan base is kind of going back and forth because of this Brendan Sorsby thing. But since Sorsby is not quarterback anymore, I don't see it. I think this game could get a little heated and a little toxic. I just don't think it's College Game Day worthy. And then my last one that I have down here is Indiana at Michigan. And I see this maybe, but I just don't know about the double dipping thing. And I've held off a couple of those because of, this team was on College Game Day the week before, or, maybe there's another game that was on the week, a certain week, but the week after I have them already on College Game Day, so I kind of held off with that. I think that's one of these games. Maybe they do double dip Indiana here, especially with it being at Michigan, not in Bloomington. But there wasn't a lot of games to really pick from that I'm at least high on. So I thought to myself, I'm not going to be able to predict the future in terms of the group of 5 rankings there. So let's just go with Princeton and Harvard. So that's my prediction there. Week 9 is going to be Arizona State at BYU. And maybe you can convince me off of this. I have a couple of games here as well. But BYU is going to be a contender in the Big 12 championship. If you made me pick the top 2 teams, I would probably tell you Texas Tech and BYU as my top 2 contenders in the Big 12. Arizona State is coming off 2 years ago with Cam Scadaboo, a college football playoff quarterfinal appearance. I almost said semifinal. It's quarterfinal. But that could be a game that maybe Arizona State, if they come back, they kind of had a little bit of a down year with Sam Leavitt dealing with all of those injuries that he had and not playing the full season. Maybe Arizona State has a bounce back year and can get ranked at some point, maybe in the top 15, top 20. And this could all of a sudden be a whole different ball game. Of course, this game was actually played in Arizona State a couple years ago, and BYU was ranked very high. And I believe there was like a controversy with the game not ending fully and Arizona State fans rushing the field, and then they had to pull everybody back off the field just for Arizona State to win again, and then they ran on the field again. That was a couple of years ago. But this game could also be a good game that maybe you look for in College Game Day. But that's why I have that here. I have 2 games written down here for week 9 and other contention games. I have Ohio State at USC. That could be a game depending on Ohio State's record and depending on USC's record at this point. That could be a game that could be very interesting. I think if both teams are in the top 15, top 10, that could be probably the front runner. But there's a lot of Ohio State on this list. So I think this is a week that you kind of skip over for Ohio State. And maybe even since if my prediction is right, you've already been to the Coliseum once this year, maybe you kind of pass them up this again in week 9. And then another one I have here is the cocktail party with Florida and Georgia on the neutral field. This is going to be in, I believe, Atlanta this year. It's not going to be in Jacksonville. Or no. Where do they even have this at normally? I think it is in Jacksonville is where they have it. The neutral field normal. But I'm not positive on that. I think it is in Jacksonville, though. And they're doing renovations to the stadium, so they're not going to have it on their primary neutral field. So instead of giving them a home-and-home series like they should have, they instead give it to another neutral field in Georgia, and then next year they're going to have it in, I think, Tampa, I think it is. So it's stupid. Just give them a home-and-home series if you're reinventing or doing renovations, I guess I should say, to the original stadium where it is originally being played at. Just give them a home-and-home series. So out of spite, I'm not going to give them College Game Day, but it is going to be in my honorable mentions, a game in contention for College Game Day. We'll see what Georgia looks like, of course, coming off of the Bama game. Florida could be a team that everyone is kind of sleeping on here in terms of, SEC title contention, maybe even an at-large bid for the playoff. I feel like that's a little bit of a stretch, but it could happen, especially with, Billy Napier gone. This, of course, being Florida's, I forget what is his name. I'm going to come back to that because that's going to bug me. But Florida has a new coaching staff now. Billy Napier is gone, back to coaching the group of 5, group of 6, no matter what you want to call it. Don't really matter to me. But that is a game that could also be in contention. But I just do have to kind of get some Big 12 representation in here. Arizona State at BYU. Week 10, a couple more weeks here and we'll be out of here. Week 10 is going to be Miami at Notre Dame. I don't see really any other game here. I do have one game that it's going to be a coin flip, but this is going to be Notre Dame's second and last test of the regular season, basically. In their schedule, they will be most likely undefeated in this game. Miami is going to be a favorite and maybe have one loss at the worst, maybe 2. And they're going to be a favorite and they're going to be a title contender for the ACC and even the playoff. And this is going to be a preview of the college football playoff, I guess you could say. This is going to be in South Bend late in the year, so that's going to be an issue for Miami, of course, coming up from Florida to Indiana. And Notre Dame is a blue blood. Miami, I wouldn't say Miami's a blue blood, but yeah, I wouldn't say it. But they're kind of on that Penn State edge of being a blue blood. I wouldn't put them in blue blood, though. But Notre Dame for sure is a blue blood. And Miami is going to be a favorite to win the ACC and a favorite in a contender, I should say. I wouldn't say favorite, I guess, but a contender in the college football playoff. And if I had to pick, Notre Dame is going to be ready for this. It's going to be at home. It's going to be the revenge factor. Of course, Miami beating Notre Dame last year is the reason why Notre Dame was not in the playoff last year. Notre Dame fans are extra mad. Their fan base complains all offseason, this offseason. Their coach, I like Marcus Freeman. He's an Ohio State guy, Ohio State football player formerly, and I like him, but I disagree with what he did last year, completely just taking Notre Dame out of the bowl game that they played last year and saying, forget it, we quit. If we're not going to be in the playoff, we're not going to play a bowl game. We quit, we're done. I just found that very, very cowardly. And now it would be hilarious for Notre Dame to lose this game. I don't see it happening. I think Notre Dame is going to go into the playoff as an undefeated team. and unfortunately get a bye. If you can't hear the disgust in my voice of Notre Dame having a bye in the college football playoff is ridiculous. But whatever, it is what it is. Moving on, Notre Dame needs to join a conference, blah, blah, blah. Other game, Ohio State and Oregon. Oregon going into Columbus, Ohio State most likely going to be wearing their blackout uniforms for this game. They're in new and improved blackout uniforms that look awesome. And this is probably going to be a 3:30 game, of course, with Notre Dame having the partnership with Peacock/NBC. That's going to be the night game that week. I think Oregon and Ohio State will be the 3:30 game, which some people might not like. But what people don't really remember is that Penn State, if you guys remember the Penn State-Ohio State game from 2017, the comeback JT Barrett game, that was a 3:30 kickoff too. And no one really remembers that because of the end of the fourth quarter. By the fourth quarter, it's going to be dark out. This is late in the season, so, it's going to be dark by 8 o'clock. And this game is going to be finishing in the night. The environment's going to be better than a noon kickoff. I hope Big Noon doesn't take this. I hope this is just going to be a 3:30 game that we can watch and have an actual blackout game, at least as far as we're going to get. Because with the Fox contract that we have, it's just not great for the Big Ten. Anyways, I just think that Notre Dame and Miami is going to be the game that College Game Day is going to go to. Maybe they go to Ohio State and Oregon. But I just think that when Notre Dame's in a playoff contention and this is going to be one of their only games that's worth actually going to College Game Day for, I think you just got to take it. Ohio State has so many other games on their schedule that College Game Day could go to. So does Oregon. And this is like the only Notre Dame game that they're going to be able to go to in the regular season. So that's why I have Notre Dame there instead of Ohio State and Oregon. But it's a very good shot that Oregon and Ohio State, depending on their record, could also do that as well. Week 11, I'm going to have Texas at LSU. And maybe this is a little bit of a hot take, but if Texas only has, let's say, one loss between the Ohio State game, the Texas game, or the Oklahoma game, and maybe another, SEC game that gives them a little bit of a scare. LSU is coming off of the Clemson win and the Ole Miss win. I guess maybe having LSU on here 3 times is a little bit of a stretch, but I'm high on LSU this year, and I think they are a contender for the Big Ten or the SEC and the college football playoff. So, we'll see what happens with LSU. Maybe this is a take of mine that completely falls on its face, and LSU is a team that struggles to go bowling this year in Lane Kiffin's first year. I find that unlikely, so I'm going to give it to Texas and LSU. This was kind of a weird little week. So, yeah. Week 11, we'll go to other games here I have on here. USC at Indiana. Maybe you don't go back to Indiana because of the Ohio State-Indiana game. Maybe you don't go back to Bloomington, but that's a game that you could do if USC has a respectable, record at this point. But late in the year, you never know. And then the other game I have down here is Michigan and Oregon. Michigan, if they beat Oklahoma, if they beat Iowa, if they, survive another game or two that they have, if Bryce Underwood looks good, and they have a respectable record and a top 15 ranking, Oregon is probably going to be undefeated, if not 1 loss, maybe 2 at worst at this point. So, and it's going to be in Autzen. So, East Coast team going out to the West Coast, time difference there. Maybe that's a game that College Game Day kind of looks at if Michigan is respectable. I just don't know. I don't trust Michigan enough, especially in year 1 of Kyle Whittingham. I just don't trust Michigan to get there completely unscathed, especially with the schedule that they have. So I'm going to say no on that one, and I'll just give it to Texas at LSU. Then week 12 is going to be Miami again versus Virginia Tech. And this game, there wasn't a lot of options here. I didn't even have other games for consideration for this week. There just wasn't a lot. Miami, this could be a game where Miami clinches the ACC title appearance that they've been so desperately longing for ever since they've joined the ACC. And this game could be the game where Miami clinches it and, they just kind of take week 13. I think they play Florida State. I'm sorry, they play Florida State at the end of the year every year, I believe. I'm pretty sure they play Florida State at the end of the year every year. No, Florida does. Florida plays Florida State at the end of the year. I think Miami just kind of plays whoever at the end of the year. They don't have like a rivalry weekend game like some teams do. But this could be a game where Miami looks at and says, we can go clinch it against Virginia Tech. This will be James Franklin's first year at Virginia Tech. And, there's going to be a lot of interest from that, from the national media and, Penn State fans, especially if James Franklin does really, really good at Virginia Tech in his first year. If Virginia Tech is somehow ranked in even like a top 20 team, I could really, really see this game being a college football or college game day appearance for them. I would only say that this game is in Miami and not in Virginia Tech. I think if it was in Virginia Tech, this would for sure be the location for college game day this week. But since it's not in Miami, maybe this is a group of 5, week that they kind of go and maybe the top group of 5 team that's, projected in all college football rankings at this point. Maybe they go to that game and maybe there's a game that I'm just not seeing. So maybe that, but for now, I'm going to go with Virginia Tech at Miami. And then for the last week of the regular season, did you have to guess? It's going to be Ohio State, Michigan. It's the best game in college football. It's the best rivalry in all of sports. And if Ohio State is, at let's say 10-2 and Michigan is at 10-2, that's a glorified playoff game. Ryan Day and Ohio State. Ryan Day has actually never won against Michigan in Columbus. Of course, the first opportunity he was going to get was 2020. Michigan ended up canceling that game because of COVID. 2022, Ohio State lost that game. 2024, Ohio State lost that game. So this would be Ryan Day's first, or not first chance, but if Ohio State were to win, this would be Ryan Day's first victory in Columbus. And Ryan Day has won 2 games in this rivalry. They've both been in Ann Arbor. Michigan under Kyle Whittingham, this is going to be his first taste of the game. I just don't think that, with the stakes of this game, normally add on to maybe both of these teams are competing for a playoff berth. I don't think that College Game Day passes this up. But I do have other games on here. Bama at Auburn. That rivalry game is a whole different story when the game is at Auburn versus when it's in Tuscaloosa. But, that could be an option for College Game Day. Georgia at Georgia, or Georgia Tech at Georgia. Maybe that's an option if Georgia Tech is respectable. I doubt that. But if you look back at the history of this rivalry, Georgia Tech's wins in this rivalry come in Athens versus coming at home. I think their last 2 victories in this rivalry have been on the road versus at home, which is weird, but it is what it is. I do think that Georgia kind of unleashes and kind of lets the dogs loose. Ha 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 ha. Funny. Unintended pun, but they kind of just let it all out against Georgia Tech because of how close that game was last time it was in Athens. I think, Kirby Smart kind of adds a little bit more salt in the wound. Georgia Tech is losing the entire core that they've had for the last couple of years. This year, I think Georgia Tech is kind of in for a down year. But if Georgia Tech can kind of keep their heads above water and get respectable and be a ranked team, a bubble team there in terms of the top 25, not the college football playoff, but a bubble team in the top 25, maybe College Game Day considers it. Highly unlikely. And then my last sleeper one is Oregon and Washington. This would be played in Autzen. Oregon would probably be my number 1 team in the Big Ten. I think maybe clinched a Big Ten championship or championship game appearance by this point. Washington, a very underrated team, a team that I'm very, very high on coming into this year. Don't look out for Washington because a lot of people are overlooking them. And especially if you're a Big Ten team and you're overlooking Washington and just being like chalking that up as a win, you're going to lose that game because Washington is no slouch. They're kind of like the Iowa of the West Coast. Not as physical because Iowa is a run the ball, stop the run type team. Pittsburgh Steelers, I like to call them, a college football. But Washington is a little bit less physical, but they're still physical. They have a returning quarterback that's, very, very good. And their defense is always, if not good, half decent. Their offense is respectable. Their coach is one of the better. He's in the top half of coaching rankings, I would say, in the Big Ten. But that's saying a lot because the best coaches in college football all kind of reside in the Big Ten, besides Kirby Smart. And Marcus Freeman, I guess you could put in there. But Ryan Day, Dan Lanning, Kurt Cignetti, Kyle Whittingham, if you want to call him a top 15 head coach, he's in the Big Ten now. Lincoln Riley, if you want to call him in terms of his offensive style, Big Ten coach. A lot of these guys have, the top tier coaches are all, except from a couple of people, are all in the Big Ten. And to say that you are a top half, coach in the Big Ten, that's saying a lot. So Washington, I'm very, very high on coming into this year. We'll see what happens with them, but look out for Washington in this year. And they could be a borderline playoff contender. And Oregon, I think, does beat Washington this year, especially with it being in Oregon. But you can never count out a team, especially in a rivalry game. So that could also be in contention for a college football playoff or a college game day. I don't know why I keep doing that. College game day appearance if Washington is, a top 15, top 10 team. And Oregon is where I expect them to be, which is a top 3, top 5 team. So that is going to do it for this. I hope you guys enjoyed. This was actually a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will be back next week. We'll see what I want to do. Maybe I start my predictions next week. I never know. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys disagree with some of my stuff, please make sure you comment down below. Keep it respectful, please, but make sure you comment down below. Maybe I'll see a couple of your guys' rankings if you want to put those down there. Thank you for making it this far, and I will see you when I see you.